Enriched open source for geospatial intelligence analysis. I'm Don Widener, Technical Director for the Advanced Analytics Lab. With me is Kyle Lewis, our Senior Intelligence Analyst. In today's flash talk, in this lightning talk, we're going to discuss how BAE Systems has supported the Syrian refugee trend analysis pilot project in conjunction in partnership with National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. We're going to talk about some of the lessons learned and
So I'm an analyst from BAE Systems. I know a lot of you guys have heard talks about tools and other technologies out there. I'm one of those guys that has to implement those things. And so that's what we mean when we talk about hybrid analysts. We talk about the people that have experience working on government locations, such as myself, who have come back to the lab and are experimenting with the newest data acquisition as well as analytics technologies. And so we recently put that to use in the use case that Don just mentioned in the project examining the Syrian refugee crisis.
Yes, the Advanced Analytics Lab is charged with supporting our over 1,600 intelligence analysts that are currently supporting intelligence community operations. This fusion of bringing the analysts to deliver and design the tools that they use really increases efficiency and kind of drives that bionics for the analysts themselves.
So a lot of this was much like what the previous speaker was talking about, which was using things like social media and other unclassified open sources to fill in gaps in places, but then also to do sort of new things with this, such as queue up commercial imagery based on things that we were seeing in social media. So we collected our information from a wide variety of sources: social media, open source media. We did some micro-tasking. We had some commercial imagery. We took all of this information, we kludged it together. We tagged everything with spatial, temporal, and thematic tags. If that information wasn't endemic within the information that we collected, we did some geoinferencing to tie things to a specific location. And we also, again, used that to do things like tip and queue commercial imagery. We're advancing here. There we go. So again, some of the sources that we're talking about, you've all heard about before: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. For this case, Syrian refugee crisis, of course, the humanitarian data played a huge role. We use local government data, which is biased in some cases, but still tremendously valuable, whether you're talking about the Syrian regime or the Iraqi regime across the border. And then the approach we used, as Don mentioned, was an automated process. So the analyst up front identified these important sources of information, fed it into this tool that we built. We used some natural language processing to sort all of this stuff and tag it so the analyst could then go and look at it later on. So all of these things add up to about a 70 to 80% time savings for that analyst. So instead of identifying and spending time collecting and managing information, they can spend their time analyzing the information. So we're just briefly going to go over some of the findings here. And so a lot of the data that we were using was sort of aggregated. We tried not to focus too much on specific individuals here, but we were still able to identify trends at the local, national, as well as regional levels. Things like where new violence would pop up, we'd examine new refugee flows or highlight these before some of the humanitarian organizations on the ground would find these. Of course, your traditional measuring the sizes and changes inside refugee camps or changing locations of refugee camps, as well as some of the sentiment in these locations. So we looked at refugee camps, IDP locations, and we were able to identify sort of competing factional sympathies within these camps. What we're showing you here is also something we tooled around with, which is just measuring volume of reporting coming out of these specific locations and comparing it to the actual refugee numbers. And we actually found some rough correlations. So you can see here the previous slide. Actually, if we go back one just briefly here, I just wanted to point out, you can see Turkey is this line here. It may be a little difficult to see, but we actually found a correlation both in the increase in reporting at a time when there was a huge surge in refugees, as well as relative volume of reporting amongst the other countries. So Turkey, nearly 3 million refugees in country right now, far more than the other countries you see here, and that's sort of reflected in the next chart. Similar story on this one here with Greece, where there was a huge flow going into Greece. We were able to roughly measure social media volume coming out of locations where refugees were actually landing, and compare that and find some correlations between the actual numbers of refugee numbers. So this was important for us, because if you didn't have those numbers, or if you wanted to do some predictive analytics, we said, hey, you know what, you might be able to use some of this data as a proxy when you don't have the actual hard figures. You can go to the next slide. Back one. So again, some of the sources, you've probably heard, if you work this problem set, this part of the world, you've heard about all the secure messaging apps that people are using, WhatsApp, and even some of the older ones like Skype. But what we found, especially for the problem with the Syrian conflict, when the idea is to get as much information out there as you can, it's old, reliable Facebook, Instagram, Twitter that provided the vast majority of information, as well as Foursquare, which is interesting, where you had refugees doing things like checking into specific refugee camps or restaurants, or cluing other people in to maybe come by this restaurant because they were offering deals to people. Very interesting, using it the same way, obviously, that we do. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, next slide. So we've talked a lot about social media. Don, do you want to mention some of our partnerships with the commercial imagery that we also use?
Yes, so we were able to tip and cue imagery collection, and we were roughly getting around within 3 hours of requesting imagery collection, we were receiving Airbus imagery. So this was very important for immediately kind of correlating with the social media and making sure that the analysis was correct.
Yeah, so we also experienced it with microtaskings, where you have people on the ground collecting information for you in a more targeted fashion, which was useful for the refugee project, and we're using it on a bigger scale now for some other things, such as monitoring ceasefire violations in Syria, as well as doing some basic human geography foundational intelligence creation using some of that microtasking information.
Yeah. Great.
And I think that's all the time we've got. So if you want to hear more, you'd stop by our booth, 1128. We're also offering a couple of training sessions on Tuesday morning and I think Monday afternoon. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.